everybody. This is the Chasing Justice podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Elena, and I am a content creator here at Chasing Justice. This season is all about civic engagement, and this is our very first episode on voting. So we're starting with voting because we know it is what is on everyone's minds, and we want to make sure that you have enough time to prep for Election Day. And so to help us out today, we have Kayla Griffin with us. Kayla is a native of Youngstown, Ohio. She is a public servant who's dedicating her life's work to serving the very community in which she lives. She is the Ohio State Director for the organization All Voting is Local. She also is the president of the Cleveland branch of the NAACP. She is an ordained elder in the Lord's Church, and she is also a published author and speaker. So, Kayla, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Elena. Glad to talk with you.
All right, so we'll just hop right into it. I would love to hear from you about why it is that you are so passionate about voting.
Yeah, so I have this little saying that I came up with in 2020 when I started working in this field. It's that voting is the front door to the mansion of democracy. Everything that we see and experience in our democracy really starts with what you vote for and who you vote for. Because we live in a democratic republic where we elect people to serve the interests of the people, then we have to be able to engage in the system. We need to be able to hold them accountable. We need to have a say in who's actually making decisions for us. And so I think that's super important. And I think that is part of our call to love our neighbor and to show up for our neighbor in our communities.
That's so good. Yeah, I love how you touch on this idea of loving our neighbor. What does it look like, or how is it that your faith informs first your belief in the importance of voting, but also as you're thinking about specific issues to vote on, how is it that your faith guides you in thinking about those things?
Yeah. So faith is central to the work that I do here in Cleveland. And I think it should be central to all of the believers who are engaging and sitting in this place. In the United States of America, if we are citizens, we have a right to cast a ballot. And we often are standing in the gap for those who cannot cast a ballot. It's a part of our intercession. We see all throughout the scripture that whether it was the prophets or the apostles in the New Testament, standing up and speaking truth to power, to really struggling for the faith. And a small part of that struggling for the faith is simply engaging in the governmental system that has power over us, that has authority over us in this time. I think about in the Old Testament when we see the prophets who are standing in the courtyards or standing on the wall, really speaking and telling the leadership and telling the people that we should love mercy and do good. And I think about Jesus who stood in the middle of the synagogues or in the marketplace and preached a countercultural message and how we are to love our neighbor and pray for our enemy. We can also pray with our feet, and voting is a way to do so.
Pray with our feet. That is so good. That's so helpful to me, I think, as I think about what does it mean to live faith in the world. And as our bodies, our whole entire beings can be a prayer. And so I love that moves us into speaking truth to power and participating in these systems that allow us to advocate on behalf of our neighbor, on behalf of our communities. So good. Okay, so we also know that voting goes beyond just electing this next president. What are other types of decisions and issues that get put on ballots?
Yeah, that's a great one. So we are, because I'm in Ohio, we are seeing ballot initiative, a citizen-led ballot initiative, where the people decided to take democracy into our own hands because the government was not listening to us, because our elected officials were not listening to us. And so, similar to the phrase "pray with our feet" that Frederick Douglass coined, that is exactly what citizen-led ballot initiatives are. It is an opportunity to say, okay, because you are ignoring the will of the people, we will take power into our own hands. And this one is a matter redistricting. We always hear about like gerrymandering and redistricting at the turn of the decade because it's how power is drawn in our districts and our states. And because for over a decade, we have seen lawmakers in the state of Ohio ignore the will of the people are saying, okay, we will take it and we will remove the power from politicians and we will put it in the hands of citizens. So that's something that is on the ballot here in Ohio. And other states really should look out for it because Michigan passed a similar citizen led initiative 2 years ago. But we also are looking at judges. The state of Ohio has three Supreme Court judge races, and those are super important to really understand who is sitting in the judiciary and making decisions for the whole of the people. And then, of course, you have the presidential, you have Senate races that are happening. You have in other states governor races or lieutenant governor races. And so these are people that have a lot of power. They control a lot of money and a lot of budget. And so when we wonder, like, well, why is my community not getting resources? We have to be able to say, well, who is the decision makers in those communities?
Right, right. Yeah, that's such a helpful reminder to think about the way that the distribution of money in our communities is so distinctly attached to power. And so there's obviously many more people that are part of these processes than just beyond who will be the next sitting president. So that's good. That's good. Thank you. Okay, so thinking about your work with All Voting is Local, we know that you're doing a lot in protecting voting access and equity. We also know that unfortunately some counties and even states are trying to suppress voters in different ways. What can we do then to be not only informed about possible voting suppression that's happening in our communities, in our counties or states, but also what are perhaps some tangible actions that we can take as well?
That's a great question because I always think like we need takeaways. We need to tell people like do something. So the first thing I would say is find your local board of elections or your secretary of state. It may be called something different in your state, but follow them on social media so that you could see
Mm,
updates from what's happening. I will say for the state of
mm,
Ohio, we had a strict voter ID bill that was passed 2 years ago. So this will be the first major presidential election that people will be voting under the strict voter ID bill. A lot of folks, I'm presuming, probably don't know about this, and we are asking people, like, we're trying to educate as many people as possible. So follow folks that have, the access and the information right there. I would also say a great resource that is across the board, anybody can utilize it, is Vote 411. It will allow you to look up what's on your ballot. It will tell you what you need when you go to vote. You can check your voter registration on there. So that's a good resource to be informed and have that voter information. And then you have to use your voice. So for Ohioans, we go down to this state house and we talk to our elected officials and tell them that this is going to impact our communities. We go into our counties and we talk to our county commissioners and tell them, hey, we need more resources for elections. And then it's really also important to spread good information so that we're not spreading disinformation and misinformation in the process. And simply picking up the phone and calling down to your clerk's office or your board of elections office and asking, like, hey, I saw this. Is this true? Can you verify it? Is good practice in this time.
Yeah, on the one hand, that in some ways that makes me feel like, oh, so nervous, or it just can feel really intimidating sometimes to think about making a phone call. But I love how you framed it of like, no, especially as Christians and in the pursuit of truth, like this is an important thing for us to step into, that we are really seeking to understand what is happening here and how, yeah, perhaps misinformation is being spread that is causing harm to our communities.
Yeah, I know a lot of folks don't like to pick up the phone, and that's why I say, follow them on Twitter or X, or follow them on Instagram, or whatever platform if you're a little more comfortable. I know a lot of the counties that are in Ohio, they're on social media. And so they're putting out
Mm-hmm.
graphics, they're putting out information, and you can always engage with them that way as well. But these are our neighbors that work down the street. They're not
Mm-hmm.
some illusory figure behind the curtain and behind the veil. These
Yeah,
are like everyday people that we probably
yeah,
see and speak to in the grocery store. And so we should feel comfortable to say, hey, I'm gonna just
right.
at least, reach out to them and say, like, hi, I might be a new voter, or I'm just, I haven't voted since the last presidential election and I want to know, is there anything that I need to do? Really making a plan to vote is really helpful because
Mm-hmm.
you have already mapped out what you're going to do, whether that is vote early or vote by mail or vote on election day. You are thinking about all of the factors and you are um, coming up with solutions. So, what if my car breaks down, or what if the polling location changes? Like, you have to think through that beforehand. It's not something that we do on a whim. So we tell everybody to make a plan to vote, because when you make a plan, you are more likely to carry it out.
Um, okay, so yeah, kind of maybe connected to that then, how can we make sure that we are properly registered to vote?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would tell people go to vote.org, www.vote.org. Right on the home page, it says check your registration. So it takes you less than 30 seconds to pop in your information and it will tell you whether or not you're registered to vote. I think it's super important that everybody checks it, double checks it, triple checks it, because a lot of our communities are engaging in what we call list maintenance process, or sometimes you'll hear it called the purge process. In Texas, they removed over 1 million voters off the rolls, right? And these are people who didn't respond to a letter, or maybe moved and didn't update their registration. So that's super important to know. My colleague who works in elections with us, I saw yesterday that she was like, was like, let me just double check my registration. And she had been purged, she had been removed. And we don't know why, right? We have here in Ohio, and I think it's really important to talk about it in center because this is where I am seated. In Ohio, we underwent a recent purge where about 140,000 people were removed, and they probably either moved or passed away, and the records hadn't been cleared. But after that, our Secretary of State, he went about a process to remove immigrants, quote unquote, immigrant voters from the rolls. As we are doing some information digging and pulling public records, what we are finding is that these folks aren't non citizens. These are people who maybe had a deficiency in their voter registration, and you classified them as non citizens and pushed a narrative that is xenophobic and is fear mongering to make people think that foreign actors are invading in our elections. And what we know is that folks are citizens, they're registering to vote. People are recently naturalized and, come into this community and they're getting registered to vote. But we, because we have this fear of others, and like we can use othering to pit people
Yeah,
against each other. There's been this like
right,
escalated narrative around non-citizens voting in our elections, and we know that that's just not true.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to hear more from you then, kind of thinking about this theme of xenophobia, and perhaps also touching on what's been happening in Springfield right now. What what is your perspective, or what would you have to say when we're thinking about these narratives that exist in our country, especially in a political climate that is so polarized and so divisive? How can we as Christians be actively participating in the work of allowing our imaginations to be formed by love and unity and solidarity with one another, and truly loving our neighbor and not by these narratives of division and hate.
That's awesome. Question, and it's an awesome prompt for us all to internally think about what we can do where we are seated. You mentioned Springfield, Ohio, where we have a large Haitian community who are here legally. They have immigrated into this country. They have their proper papers. Like, they are not quote unquote illegal alien immigrants. And even when we utilize that language, it is an othering, right? When we call somebody an alien, it is an othering, right? They are people who have come from a community that has been pillaged with poverty and economic infrastructure that is declining and just crumbling. And they have been living in Springfield and helping the community to grow. But because of that, our elected officials and people in power have continued to speak this lie. And as believers, we have to be truth tellers. We have to say, no, that is not right. This is the truth, right? So that's the first point. We have to be able to stand on truth and speak truth. The second thing is that when it comes to loving our neighbor, what we have seen is that there has been bomb threats in this community. Schools have been closed down because of these threats. People are on very, very high alert for fear of being targeted and racially targeted. And that is not an indication of loving our neighbor, specifically for those of us who claim to be believers and followers of Christ. What I have seen and what I am encouraged by is that churches have rallied and accepted this population in. So we've seen pictures of them worshiping together. We've seen pictures and images of them breaking bread together in the community and supporting Haitian restaurants. And we know, we can worship together, and that's great. But when we break bread together, we really get to know each other, and that really is what loving our neighbor looks like in practice.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love what I hear from you, Kayla, and your wisdom is the importance of speaking truth in the sense of calling out lies and speaking out against injustice. And also this beautiful invitation to us to speak the truth of what it means to sit together and break bread and be in community, and that both of those things are equally important in our call as Christians. So that's so good. Well, Kayla, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your perspective, and just for being a courageous voice of truth in this world. It's been a pleasure to get to chat with you this morning.
Thank you, Elena. It's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to what this end of year has to hold. I think that believers will have an opportunity to exhibit their faith in all different types of ways, not just in elections, but this is a time where we haven't lived before. And I love that Chasing Justice is inviting people into this space.
All right, friends. Well, that is a wrap on today's episode. Remember that we would really just love to hear from you. So you can drop us a comment on Instagram or YouTube, and we can keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, you can also share, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss out on our future episodes. Thanks so much for being here with us today. And remember, like Kayla shared, voting is really the front door to democracy. So thanks for tuning in. Stay engaged, stay curious, and let's keep chasing justice together. We'll see you next time.